All right, I'm here with the one and only Shane Claiborne, and we have so much to talk about. But I want to start with probably maybe the most serious question that I've had about Shane for, I would say, at least the last 6 years, and that is, when are the dreads coming back?
Oh man. Uh, yeah, there
Is
are
that not
times that I
happening?
miss them. I'm not very aerodynamic on my bike with them and stuff, but I had a pillow every time I was, on an airplane automatically with them. But it was funny. I was, I don't know if you know this, but I shaved my head when I went to Afghanistan. I also did it when I went to Iraq because there's kind of a cultural
Yeah.
dynamic. But when they first told me, they're like, yeah, if you're going to go to Afghanistan, you're going to need to shave your head. And I'm like, oh, because I'll stand out as, an American. They're like, no, actually, we're more concerned about you being mistaken as an extremist because they often have, kind of
With
why.
your
I'm like,
dreads.
wow, interesting. Look, grab the scissors, man. Yeah. So I
Oh,
shaved it all off. And then for a while, I had a deal with my wife. She liked it short for a little while. So I got a back massage for every week that I left it short. So that's been a good bribe too. So yeah,
so they're
anyway,
not coming back. You're killing
I
it,
don't
right?
know.
No,
Yeah, I don't know.
maybe
Yeah.
I'll grow them. I wish I can grow cool
Do
dreads.
it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad there wasn't the Samson dynamic going or whatever. I guess I can preach just the same with or without hair, but yeah, it's
Yeah. So
good
I want to
times.
start. Let's go back, and I shared this with you offline. But I remember, I can't remember if I was teaching at Cedarville or maybe just finishing my PhD in Scotland. But I was in some like real academic kind of environment. But man, just really wrestling with being raised like you and many Christians in a really conservative environment. But then just reading the Gospels and seeing the tension between Jesus and the church and all this stuff. And then I read your book, Irresistible Revolution. And it was a lifeline to me because you put words to just things I were feeling or thinking or just contradictions I'm seeing in just as I'm reading the Bible, not within the Bible, but between the Bible and the modern church. And can you take us back to, I don't know if you can, for people that haven't read that book, I mean, maybe it's dated now. I don't know. That's not dated. I mean, you just came out with a new edition, I think, didn't you?
Well, that was somebody else's idea, man. Yeah, it was to on the 10-year anniversary,
Oh
which
yeah.
was not long ago, to do a revised, like write notes in the margins kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that was actually really fun. So I was able to write about my second trip to Iraq,
Oh.
because I kind of had a first trip that I wrote about there, and I'm able to talk about where some of those friendships have gone over the years and
Hmm.
the ways that stories end for good, for better or worse. It was fun. So yeah, I mean, it's been cool to see the fruit of
Hmm.
that. And I mean, I know all the writers that spoke into my life. In fact, one of them, Philip Yancey, just came here
Yeah.
to hang out in Philly. I took him out for a cheesesteak, and his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, I took
Yeah.
to India with me. I had it, in my pocket. Well, it was big, but I had it over there, carried it around with me, read it. So yeah, I'm so grateful to
Yeah.
see how the Spirit's moved in different ways. And yeah, but for me, really, the irony is the deeper I fell in love with Jesus, the more I found myself at odds with the kind of white evangelicalism that led me to Jesus. It's like, man, and I mean, we look at the climate we're in right now, and
Yeah.
boy, so many of our brothers and sisters that are still in the evangelical church
Yeah.
aren't always taking Jesus that seriously, it seems to me, and so I
Yeah.
like how Gandhi said, I love Jesus, I just wish the Christians acted more like him, so kind of where I ended up. Yeah.
One of the most impactful stories in that book, and it's been, gosh, 12 years since I read it, I think, that time when you went and spent, was it a year with Mother Teresa in Calcutta or a summer or something? And
Yeah, it wasn't a year. It was right. It was between my years of college. So I went about as long as I could go, almost 3 months. It was like 10 or 11 weeks in the summer. Oh man, but it was transformative for me. I hadn't really spent much time outside of the U.S. or even outside of the kind of little world I grew up in. And so being in India, I worked in orphanages and I worked in the home for the dying, as Mother Teresa called it, the home for the destitute and dying.
Hmm.
was her first home. And you know, she was still alive the first time I went, so I got to meet her, and
Yeah.
I learned to pray in a deeper way. I learned,
Wow.
you know, what it can look like to follow Jesus.
And the leper colony, you saw, gosh, this is how impactful that was. I mean, how different you learned what a Christ-like community should look like by hanging out with a leper colony, because they actually physically, tangibly needed each other. You know, we had one person making the shoes, one person making the shirts, whatever. And can you just, I don't know,
Yeah, this is actually
unpack
the
that a
fun
bit?
of having you on the screen here. Is I can this like right here. This was made
Oh, wow.
in that little village of folks who had leprosy, you know, and yeah, I mean, I went there, so it was interesting because there was an opportunity where one of the monks or one of the brothers, the men that were a part of Mother Teresa's order, left, and so they had a place that I could crash there. By that I mean a spot on the floor.
Yeah.
And but it was this village that the property was along the train tracks, so it wasn't worth much. And someone donated it to Mother Teresa because literally the train tracks went right through this village of 300 families or whatever, you know. But she built this community there, 300 or so families that in the, I mean, the caste system is still very real, you know. So that, like, when we say outcast, I mean, there it was literally, with the caste system, you couldn't go in restaurants and you couldn't, you know, shop in public places, things like that. So she took this group of people that were totally outcast, and she said, these folks are very special to God and they deserve dignity. And so we're going to create a village together. And, um, and it was named Gandhiji Prem Nevis, which means Gandhi's new life. And if you know, those that know much about Gandhi know that his idea was like, we're going to build a new society in the shell of the old one, a new world in the shell of the old one. Where, you know, the spinning wheel was one of the, you know, iconic images that we'll make our own clothes, we'll grow our own food, we'll march to the sea and get our own salt and wean ourselves off of the kind of oppressive social structures that are hurting us. And so, you know, literally they made their own clothes, their own
Wow.
shoes. They and I got to spend some time there, and I think it's also where my imagination was opened up to what it can look like to build a community,
Mhm.
um, that is trying to build an alternative way of living together in this world.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I first saw one glimpse of what that could look like in Calcutta.
And then you also, was it before or after when you went to Willow Creek? Weren't you on staff at Willow Creek for like a year?
On staff might be a stretch, but yeah, I came back. I was an intern, so I came back, and I was literally, I think it was like 1 week. I was back from Calcutta, and I took the internship at Willow Creek. So I moved out to Chicago, suburbs of Chicago, and I mean, I can remember sitting in the food court at Willow Creek. There's a
Food
food
court.
court
They
at
have a
Willow
food
Creek,
court.
you know?
Wow.
Yeah, and just thinking like, wow, these two extremes
Yeah.
exist not only in the same world but in the same church, you know, in the same, like, this is one version of Christianity and that's another. And to be honest, like, as I write about Willow Creek, there's a lot of things that I learned. I don't look back at that time
Yeah.
um, in a judgmental way. Like, I really learned a lot, just as I learned in India. I learned a lot, you know, in South Barrington, Illinois.
So this is what I love about you and your trajectory is you're willing, because a lot of people that have a similar trajectory, and I would even say my trajectory is similar to yours in many ways. Sometimes they just, it ends up being, they go to the other extreme where, you know, anything that smells conservative, evangelical, whatever, is just of the devil. It's what's wrong with everything in the country and everything. But you maintain a prophetic critique, I think, of any brand of Christianity that's not imitating Jesus. Imagine that. But I appreciate that you do see, you still see values and things that are good in some of the most conservative branches of evangelicalism. Can you, what are some of those things? You look back on your faith journey, you know, and you've been in a wide range of evangelical contexts or not even non-evangelical. I mean, what are some things that you feel like conservatives, for lack of better terms, are like, man, I still applaud these, you know, values or things that conservatives are doing or saying?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I do find myself a little bit of a political misfit. You know, I
Yeah.
don't really feel at home in any camp or party.
Yeah.
And that's been like that way for a long time. And one reason for that is because my overarching ethical umbrella is a consistent life ethic, you know, that every person is created in the image of God. And when someone's dignity is squashed or someone's life is cut short, that matters to God, you know. And part of what grieves me is that we've so narrowly defined what it means to be pro-life
Hmm.
to one issue, really, to abortion, that a lot of pro-lifers would be more accurate in saying they're pro-birth or they're anti-abortion, because they really just think about that in terms of one issue. Whereas for me, I do care about abortion. I care passionately about eradicating abortion and reducing abortions, but I also care about gun violence, the death penalty, you know, welcoming immigrants, caring for creation. You know, there's a whole host of other um, pro-life issues
Yeah.
other than just abortion. So,
Yeah.
um, and that means that, you know, I don't think there's a political party that really feels like it captures that very well. And I mean, in the last election, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were both for the death penalty, which was a major issue I was working on then. You know, I mean, um, uh, so I think when it comes to a value of life, the political parties sort of fall short. You know, but I think like um, Jesus kind of um, transcended the political categories of his time, but he was pulling and affirming some of the best in them. You know,
Yeah.
so you had the Essenes that kind of lived life on their own. You know, really detached from society, but there was something there to pay attention to. You know, like John the Baptist kind of pulled on some of that tradition, I think, in the desert. But then there's, you know, you had the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and the Pharisees had a lot of good ideas, but they really heaped heavy burdens on people and were real self-righteous and didn't live up to the things that they put on paper, you know? So Jesus is kind of like, yeah, they say good things, but, you know, don't live like them, you know? So, yeah, I kind of feel that, you know, now, I will say, you know, when it comes to concern, like I have a very high view of Scripture, you know, so I often say that the problem isn't exactly fundamentalism; it's selective fundamentalism.
Yeah.
You know, because if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, I'm a fundamentalist. I'm trying as hard as I
Right.
can to take the words of Jesus literally. When you look at things like the Jubilee, I mean, this is God's systemic dismantling of inequity in the world, redistribution of property. I mean, many of the Christians I know, if they read the Jubilee, they'd be like, "Whoa, that's socialism or communism." You're like, no, it was God's idea to like
Yeah.
make sure that we didn't create massive inequity in the world, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really don't find, and I also think that um, self-righteousness is not partisan, you know, and
Yeah.
there's a kind of fundamentalist, legalistic, conservative self-righteousness that you and I are familiar with. That's kind of what we were raised in. But there's also a progressive
Right.
self-righteousness, and I see that in a lot of circles that I'm in. Folks that, you know, if you use a plastic straw, then whoa, you know, it's like chewing tobacco when I was in high school. You know, oh, you are a sinner, man. You know, so anyway, I think that like Jesus did not just come to um, make bad people good, but to bring dead people to life. And
Yeah.
it's not just about. I think that
Right.
living in a life-giving way is really important, and you can keep the rules and still be really mean or judgmental, and that's part of what I think Jesus is coming to free us of.
You said that you kind of feel tribalist, or you don't have like a political party you resonate with. I mean, is there any kind of sub community and what am I trying to say? Like a tribe, let's just say capital or lowercase t tribe or denomination, whatever, in Christianity that you resonate with the most? I know you've kind of you got some Catholic leanings and also some UMC and other circles you run in, so Anabaptist, whatever. I mean, is there one that's like, oh man, if I had to pick one actual tribe within Christianity, this one I resonate with the most? Is that
Well, that's a great question. It's an interesting thing to think about. I guess where I'm finding a real home
Yeah.
is in the historic Black church and the charismatic church that has survived um, slaveholder religion, as my friend Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove calls it, like the idea that there are folks that the liberation story has been real to them, but so is a personal relationship with Jesus. And so a lot of folks that I find leaving white evangelicalism aren't going anywhere, and it kind of ends up allowing the most toxic forms of Christianity to colonize the whole thing. Because I find tons of life happening outside of white evangelicalism. And that's not to say that there aren't white evangelicals that are living really beautiful, faithful lives. But I do think that Donald Trump has revealed some deep problems with our Christianity and just in general. It's been said that Donald Trump did not change America, he revealed America.
Yeah. Oh, I
And I think
totally agree with that.
the same is true of the church too. Is Donald Trump didn't change white evangelicalism, but he's revealed it. And when we continue to have over 70% of white evangelicals defending things that are indefensible and that daily are a betrayal of the values of Jesus and the Beatitudes, Sermon on the Mount, the fruits of the Spirit, all of that, like you just can't get further from the teachings of Jesus than some of the things we're seeing in our country. So it's not a partisan thing. This isn't just like left and right, but right and wrong. But I do find, like, I find a lot of love in the Catholic Church and the liturgical, church in general. I think Pope Francis is rocking it. He's and Saint Francis of Assisi, so Oscar Romero, Dorothy Day, so many of the Catholic saints and Christian saints are inspirations for us. But like I said, I love being alongside of spirit-filled liberationist folks like Reverend Barber and Tracy Blackman. Those are the folks I'm leaning into these days, and they're in the same vein of like Dr. Martin Luther King, and I'm finding a lot of life there.
Since you mentioned politics a couple times, do you have a favorite Democratic candidate in the making right now, or?
Well,
what do you think of Tulsi?
We need a commercial break, don't we? No, I find that like there's some really, really great conversations happening. Like I'm encouraged by a lot of the folks that we're hearing from. I mean, when I think of voting, though, I'm going to say this: like, I think part of our posture as Christians is that we're not looking for a Messiah. We're looking to do damage control. And too often, I think the danger with politics is we think, this is the hope of America. This is the hope of the world. And so when the early Christians were saying Jesus is Lord, they were saying Caesar is not, and so I think we wrote a whole book, Jesus for President, around that. I mean, I do think that, like, what the way I will be thinking about election day is doing damage control. And I find myself, like, as a Christian, compelled to do everything I can to stop the policies and rhetoric of Donald Trump. So I find it less voting for someone and more voting against someone.
You could weasel out of this if you want. I don't know how public.
I'm doing a good job of weaseling out of it so far, but yeah. I mean, honestly, I've often said, like, I want to engage everyone and endorse no one. I want to endorse the values that I see in Jesus, and then say, whoever's like aligned with those the most, that's who I'm going to vote for. But like when it comes to treating immigrants, I care deeply about that. Welcoming immigrants. Jesus said, when you welcome the stranger, you welcome me. Show hospitality to the foreigner. You may be entertaining angels unaware. So this is holy work. And there's a heck of a lot at stake, Same with gun violence, the death penalty. So I care about these issues. Because to me, loving my neighbor as myself includes caring about the policies that affect my neighbor, So I think it's irresponsible to say I'm loving my neighbor and not engage in political things in a nonpartisan way. Yeah.
So Yeah. So you might be, let me put this in a real diplomatic way. You might lean towards um, supporting would be too strong, endorsing maybe a candidate that would have the best chance of getting rid of Donald Trump. That would be the kind of.
Yeah, I think in the federal election, that's one of the things I'm going for. You know, there aren't too many people that are challenging the massive military industrial complex that we live in, you know, and
Yeah.
so that's one of the things for me is like, what does it mean to follow Jesus when you live in the biggest military
Yeah.
superpower in the world? Like, you know, so that, you know, but inequity between the super rich and super poor,
Yeah.
my gosh, I mean, that's something Jesus cares about, you know. I mean, you read the first chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and it says, the mighty are cast from their thrones, the lowly are lifted, the hungry are filled, the rich are sent away empty. And that's not Karl Marx. It's not even Bernie or Elizabeth. That's Mary, you know, that's the gospel. So, yeah.
I taught a class on ethics. This was back at Cedarville, and one of the assignments we dealt with war, abortion, just kind of classic ethical ones, and then economics. And as part of their assignment, I had them read through the Gospel of Luke and
Yeah.
note every time Jesus made a statement about economics, about wealth, about poverty, and that was it was because I did that shortly before I assigned that, and I was just like, this is everywhere, especially in Luke. I mean, Luke's like, the progressive gospel. But I mean, yeah, it was fascinating just how often, even stories that are retold in other gospels, Luke puts that emphasis on this, how you view wealth, how you view the poor, whether you care for them or not, is a main barometer on your commitment to
Totally,
Jesus.
man. Yeah, I mean, there's over 2,000 verses that talk about that, right? That God's
Yeah,
concern for the poor and justice for the poor.
yeah,
So, you know, in Jesus's final account of the judgment in Matthew 25 is all of us are going to be
yeah,
gathered and we're going to be asked, when I was a stranger, did you welcome me in? When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was sick, did you,
mhm.
you know, provide health care? Did you take care of me? You know, so I think those things do matter to God. And they should matter to those of us who claim to follow Jesus too. So yeah, yeah,
We can move beyond politics there. I don't want to get in any trouble, but I got a question that may not come out in your book. So, I mean, you're an activist. You're out in the community, locally, globally. You got a punishing speaking schedule, but I'm looking at your background here. You got a ton of books, and I often see
I
you
got a couple years on here, I think, man. Yeah, I got them strategically placed right behind. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
the rest of the walls. I mean, you're an incredibly thoughtful person. Do you have you must do a lot of reading, is what I'm getting at, or at least thinking or journal or something. Do you have like in your schedule, because you have so much output? Do you set aside time, like daily time, weekly time, to let's like comb through books and really fill your mind up? Or
Yeah, I think so. I'm glad my wife isn't here to correct me, but she says I need to read more fiction and stuff like that. But yeah, I try to read a lot, especially when I'm writing about things that I'm, you know, still learning about, like guns. I didn't know a ton about guns. I got probably like 15 books over there on guns that I, you know, really poured into. And same with the death penalty, you know, did a lot of reading on that, even how, you know, how the biblical death penalty worked. And, so yeah, I love learning stuff like that, you know, and there's things that still I'm invited to speak on, and I'm like, you know, I think I probably need to read and learn a little bit more about that before I'm ready to talk about it. I mean, someone was just asking me yesterday um, about abortion, and um, I'm reading about that right now and learning about it, because I don't think it's as simple as like overturn Roe versus Wade. I think the question is like, how can we do the best job at protecting life, and including the mothers and women that are affected by this. And of course, you know, then the question is, do you need another dude writing a book about abortion? So I'm leaning into a lot of women, you know, as I listen to that. But yeah, so I love reading though, man. I did try reading a little fiction. I like I read some Kurt Vonnegut, you know.
okay.
I actually got to meet Kurt Vonnegut before he passed away, but I read, trying to read a little bit of fiction. There's my wife, so she's actually going to
Oh,
correct me now.
hey,
So
how's it going?
he was asking me if I read a lot, and so I was
No.
Doc said, I told you. But anyway, Yeah, so I've really enjoyed having an excuse to read, about stuff that I don't know a ton about.
Do you like have a set? Are you like a routine person? Do you have like from 9 to 11 Tuesdays and Thursdays? It's nothing but reading time. I'm nobody can interrupt me, or are you not really a scheduled kind of
Oh,
person?
dude, I totally love structure and I'm terrible at it. So, yeah, I would love to have like reading time from 9 to 12 every day or so. And I like that in theory, but it never works that way. So, I have times where I'll try to set aside time to write and read, but
Yeah,
I'm always, interrupted or
yeah.
too much of a anarchistic soul to like keep all the structures I put in place. But yeah.
How do you? I mean, I'm sure you're in high demand both locally in your community and abroad and emails and all that. How do you not go crazy? I mean, and you seem like the type of person that is somewhat available. Like I know when you travel, you like to stay at people's homes and you talk to people. I've been at you at conferences and you take time to talk to people. Like you don't rush off to the green room and hide out. Like how do you not go crazy? I mean,
I keep a good rhythm. I guess all of us have to figure out ways that we energize our souls so we're
yeah,
not, riding on fumes, but I have a very rich life. And part of that is like travel. I limit my travel to not be gone more than like 10 days a month or,
yeah,
so I'm not gone more than I'm away. And
yeah,
being in my neighborhood, hopefully in the garden in a little bit, like all that puts wind in my sail. Um, and the other thing is like talking about part of what I've gotten a lot of life out of talking about specific things like
mhm,
the death penalty and guns is they are things you can kind of put your finger on,
yeah,
and we get so overwhelmed with information and all the chaos and all the issues of justice that are out there that I like to kind of hone in on those. And particularly I talked about the death penalty and gun violence because I think these are not only political crises, but
yeah,
they are spiritual crises
yeah,
because Christians are on the wrong side of these issues by and
mhm,
far when it comes to gun violence and the death penalty. So, kind of trying to, poke some holes in the theology that justifies those things has been really energizing. The other thing I'll say is I love collaborating. So, a lot of my books I've done together. I did a book with John Perkins, who's
yeah,
almost 90 years old, son of a sharecropper. I did a project with Ben Cohen from Ben from Ben and Jerry's ice cream,
really, I
and
didn't know that.
we did a project called Jesus Bombs and Ice Cream. You would like it actually. We
Oh,
we ended up. It's the first weapon conversion we did. So we turned an AK-47 into a shovel and a rake, and we dropped buckets of Ben and Jerry's from helium balloons, from
no way.
the balcony. So it was awesome. But I love writing with other people. Tony Campolo and I did a book together, and
Yeah.
I did one with Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove. So I really like the collaborative stuff, and then you kind of put your minds together on stuff. Yeah.
So let's get into guns and death penalty. Let's start with guns and violence. I mean, how many mass shootings are there this year? 200 and is it 50 or 60 or something? I mean, it's insane. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
it is crazy. I mean, it depends on exactly how you define a mass shooting because there's different definitions. How many
Okay.
people were injured, how many people were killed. But basically, what we're seeing is almost one a day. After Sandy Hook, 20 young, kids were killed. Our whole nation had a, kind of come to Jesus moment, and it was like never again. And then we've let it happen again and again and again. And we've had, 2,000 mass shootings since Sandy Hook. So and mass shootings are just a small percentage of the
Right.
the casualties of gun violence. We're seeing 105 lives lost every day to guns, and so as one who's pro-life, I think every single one of those is a person made in the image of God whose life,
Hmm.
God had a plan for their life. And as the Cain and Abel story, that inaugural murder, it says the blood cried out to God from the ground.
Yeah.
So I really believe that God is deeply grieved by our epidemic of gun violence.
What's the solution? So, man, when I peeked into that conversation, more the kind of broader political one, man, it's gnarly. I mean, it's oh, hold on a second. I could turn my. I should have had that on. Shoot. Let me get on airplane mode. Yeah. What? So in a sense, I mean, I'm asking a complex question that doesn't have a one sentence response, but what is the solution? Coming to, do guns kill people or do people kill people? Is it both? And I mean, what
Yeah.
if you were
No.
elected to some office, said, all right, you're in charge, you have unlimited money, reduce gun violence, go. Like,
Right.
what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this, and the first one is that when we end up with these dualisms, it's either or, and so one of those is this idea that what we have is not a gun problem, it's a heart problem, and I think that's a false dualism, right? A false binary. Like I think, like, why can't it be both? Like, we have a heart problem and a gun problem, and God heals hearts, but people change laws. And I think we need to kind of think in terms of both, no matter how, I mean, if we got rid of every gun in this country, which is not what we're going for, but let's say we did, well, people would still find ways to kill each other, people have turned a pressure cooker, the guy in the Boston Marathon turned a pressure cooker into a bomb. Folks have weaponized cars and driven them into crowds. Like, we will find ways to kill people. But the fact is that there are some things that are actually designed to kill. And some things like AR-15s, assault rifles, are designed to kill as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. And that's what they keep getting used for. And that's where we stand alone in the industrialized world, is by allowing weapons, military weapons, to be, just prolific in our country on the streets, and they're the weapon of choice of mass shooters. So I think what we need to do is to really hold out that this is a spiritual crisis, and we need God to heal violent, hate-filled, racist hearts. And meanwhile, we also need to change some laws so that we don't enable and empower people, sinful, broken people, to do so much damage in the world. So, I think about cars, and cars aren't designed to kill, but they can. And we've learned some things about keeping people safe, with that technology. And we've added seat belts. You're required to take a test. If you're irresponsible with your car, then you lose your license. Like, we've got limitations on how fast they can go, and how can you drink and drive, all that stuff. Like, we've done a lot to try to do research and try to protect people whose lives can be endangered by the technology. And the irony is, like, cars are not designed to kill, but guns are. And it's one of the most untouched industries in our country, and they exploit that immunity. I found this out when I was writing our book. There are more regulations on toy guns than real guns. So literally, yeah. Like, if you and I were, like, playing paintball, or, like, let's say we're playing with Nerf guns, and I shoot you in the eye, and it does, you put your eye out, you can sue Nerf. But the gun industry has an immunity from that, and gun dealers that deal with guns irresponsibly are immune. So that's some of the, like, stuff that when you really look at it, you're like, man, this stuff is really nuts. Like, it's not gun owners that are the problem; it's the gun profiteers.
Okay, that's a good distinction.
The folks that are the gun capitalists. So I'm encouraged, though. I'll say this, man, is overwhelming majority of gun owners want to see some changes made. Yeah. And when the NRA, I differentiate between gun owners and gun extremists. Okay. And the NRA, the National Rifle Association, they say that they represent 5 million people. And if we give them the benefit of the doubt, what that also means is that over 90% of gun owners are not represented by the NRA and are much more reasonable. A recent study showed that 62% of gun owners find themselves at odds with the ideology and the uncompromising rhetoric of the NRA. So to me, that's really good news. We've had vigils where we have hunters against gun violence that come. We've got this one group of gun owners against assault weapons, and on their shirt it says, "You don't need 10 rounds to kill a deer." So, I think we need a better conversation around guns. And there's things like, should there be a limit to how many bullets you can shoot without reloading? Should domestic abusers be able to get guns because there's a clear link there? Should stolen guns need to be reported? Or things like one of my favorites is called one handgun a month, that would limit the amount of handguns one person could buy. Get this, to 12 a year per person. And you're like, what in the world? And yet that law gets blocked by the uncompromising kind of gun extremists, in the NRA. And you go, who needs more than 12 handguns in a year? And you're like, someone that's selling handguns, irresponsibly. So I think we just need a better conversation.
Well, I live in Idaho, dude. So and, hung out here. So I mean, guns is such a part of the culture, but it is. I'm glad you made that distinction, because it is. I mean, hunting is a religion here, and I found that even though Idaho is very conservative, very white, it's not. I wouldn't say it's very racist. Actually, I thought it would be a lot more coming from Southern California. I was like, I'm coming to Idaho, where there's like, it's like 98% white. But even though they would be more politically conservative, they would fit that category. I think the people I talk to would be very, very, very concerned about loose gun laws, and people that don't know what they're doing with a gun, or even people with a mental illness that have a gun or a history of violence. And that distinction between the profiteers and gun owners, I think, is a good one. So I was nervous to tell you this, Shane. I own some guns.
You own some guns? Oh yeah. No, that doesn't surprise me a bit, man.
I'm a terrible hunter, but once a year I go hunting. I got a shotgun. I got a deer rifle. It would be physically impossible. I mean, I'm a pacifist, so I wouldn't use it anyway. But it would be physically impossible the way they're distributed throughout the house between the ammunition, the gun, the whatever. For me to even use it, even if I wanted to, on an actual human. Yeah, I was like, man, is Shane gonna break up our friendship?
Oh, dude, I grew up with guns, and I mean, half my family are still. I mean, almost most of the folks in my family are still gun owners. But I think even they are really leaning into this conversation around common sense gun reforms. And this is the thing where with gun owners, I love talking about things like the Second Amendment. Because it was written at a time when guns shot 1 round a minute, maybe 2, and now we have guns that shoot 100 rounds in a minute, even more than that. And what's interesting is James Madison, one of the authors of the Second Amendment, he said this: liberty can be endangered by the abuse of power, but liberty can also be endangered by the abuse of liberty.
Oh, wow. And
it takes a minute to soak that in, but he was like, there was a reason that they wrote well regulated in the Second Amendment, because they knew that one person's unregulated right to own guns can infringe on another person's right to live. And that danger has always been there. So the idea that, even Justice Scalia, the most conservative Supreme Court justices, as the ruling extended the militia rights to individuals, that was only like 2008. That they always thought we needed some very urgently important, regulations around that, or else we're going to end up in the funk that we're in right now. But here's the other thing, man, is that I think that the conversation should go even deeper with Christians who have a higher authority than the Constitution. And that's Jesus in the Bible. And you sort of go, man, what would it look like if Christians took our commitment to Jesus as seriously as our commitment to the Second Amendment? And that's where I think we really realize that this is also a spiritual crisis. When as I researched for Beating Guns, we found this out, that the highest gun owning demographic in America, unsurprisingly, is white evangelicals. But we own guns at a higher rate than the general population. So, we're worshiping the Prince of Peace on Sunday and packing heat on Monday, and I think, like, when you look at this, there's something very deep about power that it unveils for us. And the cross and the gun give us 2 very different versions of power. And one says, I'm willing to die, and the other says, I'm willing to kill. And, that's why we dedicated a whole book to this, is because I think there's all kinds of other important conversations that we need to have about
Yeah.
what we put our trust and our hope in to deliver us, right?
Yeah.
And I think how we've come to really subject ourselves to fear. And I think that's a lot of what's driving our policies in our country right now is we're held hostage to fear. While scripture
Yeah.
says so clearly, like that perfect love casteth out fear, and
Yeah.
fear and love are enemies. And there comes a point where we have to choose, are we going to live on the side of love or the side of fear?
There's also the identity piece when it comes to guns, American culture, our history, the symbolic power that a gun has. This is something that drives me crazy. People talk about a gun being kind of a neutral thing, and that's just that's sociologically and psychologically incredibly naive to think that this object does not actually have psychological influence in you just by having it. I mean, it influences the way we posture ourselves, our identity, the way we think. And this would be the big difference between, well, yeah, I don't need to keep talking about my guns, but people get so up in arms over like the Second Amendment or they're taking away our guns. I'm like, look, if the government made a law to take away my guns, I would probably drive them to the whatever and say, here they are. Who
Yeah.
cares? Like, same thing if they told me to give up my baseball bat. It's like, I love baseball, man. I got my bat right here, but my identity isn't in my, like, it's like, this isn't why I'm here. It's not for these things, these hobbies or whatever. I can go to the store and buy my meat. I don't need to, hunt it. I prefer killing my own meat, but if not, whatever. Like, I just think there's such an idolatrous spirit that I think is one of the main roots that needs to be pulled up, an idolatrous spirit that sees guns as woven into our identity, or even the Second Amendment, that this freedom we have to own guns is such a huge part of our humanity. And I think that leads to so many other idolatrous symptoms that stem from that. But
Yeah, I think that this conversation around idolatry, it might sound a little like extreme or outdated to some folks, but to be real frank, I mean, idols are things that we put our trust in. They're things that they aren't God, but we kind of treat them like they are, and we give them a certain reverence that really belongs only to God. And I think when we really begin to trust in something um, other than God, like we end up getting that out of whack. And I've been traveling around. For the folks listening, this won't be very helpful, but we traveled around the country with this Bible case that a pastor friend of mine gave me, and he said, check this out. This is one of the top selling Bible cases in the entire country. And I looked at it and I'm like, doesn't look like much. Looks like a Bible case. He goes, hold on, open it up. And you open it up and you see that it's actually a concealed carry, gun case that says Holy Bible on the front of it. So I carry that around to say, like, to folks that think that this is extreme language around idolatry, when you have a top selling Bible case that's designed to carry a gun instead of a Bible, like, it's not that extreme. And the NRA knows that. Warren Cassidy, one of the executives of the National Rifle Association, said, and I'll quote this. I quoted it. I want to make sure I got it right. So he said, you would get a far better understanding if you approach the NRA as if you were approaching one of the great religions of the world. Wow. They know that there's a, reverence to the gun and this, the sacred stuff that resides in this wooden stock and blue steel, and through my dead hands, like it's like we've made a certain idolatry out of it. And I think what idols do is, it's been said, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we worship, we are becoming. Like, it's changing us, right? And when you worship something that is a false god, it ends up changing our view of God so that God becomes more like us. And I think the opposite is true of real worship. When we're worshiping the God of the universe, Jesus, it changes us to become more like God. And our lives are being challenged in the narrative. And so when you have bumper stickers that say Jesus would still be alive if he had an AR-15, you're like, whoa, I think it's actually very true that God created us in his image and we decided to return the favor, so you got a NRA gun-toting Jesus that's ready to take out anybody that comes against him. And
It
it's,
sounds like
look,
something from the Babylon Bee or something.
oh yeah, dude, you can't make his stuff up. I mean, you can't make this stuff
Now,
up.
do you think that kind of, whatever you want to call it, the classic evangelical gun kind of culture, do you think that's going to die off? And when I talk to people that are 35 and younger, they may
Totally,
not be
dude.
on the same side of nonviolence, but the whole like partisanship, the sort of moral majority 1980s stuff, like they're just not the majority I talk to. Might still be very theologically conservative, but this stuff they're looking for a better way to talk about this. Are you finding that too? I mean,
Oh, absolutely. I think with almost every one of these conversations, um, there's a generational
yeah,
disconnect, I mean, it's especially true with the death penalty, and gun violence. I think a lot of these things, that there's an old guard white evangelicalism that is dying out, and it's not producing at least a charismatic, magnetic new generation of leaders. There's still some forms of fundamentalism, but that kind of religious right, moral majority of Jerry Falwell and Ralph Reed, I think that's definitely dying out. As Russell Moore said, there's not many young John Hagees, which won't mean anything to the millennials listening. But I think like that, the Pat Robertsons, that is an aging evangelicalism, and I thank God for it, because I think it's become really, really contaminated with power and the prosperity gospel and American nationalism that's really just camouflaging itself as Christianity, but looks almost nothing like Jesus or the Sermon on the Mount. So, I mean, I look at young millennials, and there was a study done. You and I were talking about the Q conference, and I think it was like 80% of millennial Christians are against the death penalty. And it's not in spite of their faith. It's because of it. They've done good theology. They've, looked at what scripture says about many of these issues. So I'm really encouraged. You look at young people that are rising up, the March for Our Lives around gun violence, Black Lives Matter, the, young people around the world that are rising up to take on the environmental issues. So I'm encouraged. What a fun time to be alive, I think.
Have you had any breakthrough with Liberty University? I mean, I see stuff online that, you've even spoken there and have reached out to them and stuff. I mean, are you allowed to talk about any behind the scenes conversations going on?
I have what we call a gag order. No, I'm just kidding. No, I can talk about anything I want. I think that Liberty, the interesting thing at Liberty is that I have been to speak there. You've probably been to speak there too, right? I was invited to speak there several years ago. I got really close to riding snowboarding in the summer. They have a summer snowboarding hill. Yeah, I didn't want the rug burn. I was a little nervous about that. Like, I think snowboarding should happen on snow. But anyway, it was cool. I mean, I met a lot of great folks. I'll tell you this, like, after I preached, folks were like, I bet people were upset. I said, no, the first person that came and talked to me after I preached was someone that was involved in the war in Iraq. And he came up and he said, this has weighed on my heart ever since. While you were there in Iraq, we were dropping the bombs on Iraq. And he said, I wanted to ask you just to pray with me that and that was like one of my first encounters. And they went from there, I found people really resonating there. Things have changed really dramatically with Jerry Falwell Jr. being in charge of the place. There's all kind of exposés out there and things of all that. But I mean, what we did when we had the revival in Lynchburg was we just wanted to offer a counter narrative of what Christians care about. Because when Jerry Falwell and Franklin Graham and others, Jerry Falwell has said that Donald Trump is the dream president of Christians. What happens is it's not just his reputation that's dragged through the mud, but all of ours if we don't respond to that with another narrative. And so I think we've been offering a different version of what Christians care about, and especially Christians that care about the poor and the most vulnerable people. So, we went asked for permission to go on property to pray at Liberty, as you know, I think. And we we wanted to be very specific. We wanted to pray on the gun range. They built a gun range at Liberty, and they're encouraging all their students to get guns. So we wanted to pray for the victims of gun violence. We wanted to pray outside the drone training center because they're training militarized drone operators there. So we wanted to pray, for peace. And
They have a drone training center.
yeah. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, man. So that's why we want to pray there, because we literally feel like there's principalities and powers that we're up against that get exposed there. So when the irony is that we were told if we came on campus to pray, we could be arrested. We would be arrested, and that we would be fined and spend time in jail. And all of this at a university called Liberty that has championed the right to pray in public spaces, So anyway, I think what it did was it just held a mirror up, and we were not there to villainize or vilify Jerry Falwell. We were there to lift up Jesus. And I think Jesus is the best corrective for, what's kind of gone wrong in certain parts of evangelicalism. So we had students, alumni, all kinds of other folks that really were with us. And for a long time, we were trying to get a group of Liberty students up here to work in an abandoned house, and join us in Philly and learn from each other, talk to each other. So I'm still really open to that. But I think what we felt is that there is a real oppressive, coercive power at work in a lot of those places. And that's unfortunate. Even people that were trying to tell the story in the student newspaper lost their jobs and things like that. So it was heavy, man.
Yeah, I used to teach online classes at Liberty University for a couple of years at least. And in my experience, it's not the students so much, or even the faculty. It's just like he said, there does seem to be, we can name names, but that it seems to be a small minority of people with a ton of power that's kind of controlling the narrative that exists there. I'm looking on from the outside, but you ever hung out with Franklin Graham? You guys gotten together at all?
We've asked to over and over. And actually, Franklin goes to the same church as some of my family in North Carolina. My wife's family, they worship in the same church. And so, here's the interesting thing is in every one of these situations, we've reached out privately. We've also reached out publicly because their statements are public, but we said, we would love to talk with you. We're not here to lob, grenades a mile away. We want to talk with you. And I asked Jerry Falwell and Franklin Graham if they would talk privately with us or publicly, if they would come to our revivals. I asked Jerry Falwell if we could pray together once a month, Really? So I think the important thing is that dialogue takes two, and we're holding a hand out, to open up that conversation. But I really would like to have a conversation about how Jesus informs how we are thinking about faith and politics right now in our country, because I think this is it's an absolute crossroads in American history, and we've got a role to play.
Shane, I've taken enough of your time, man.
This was fun.
This is awesome. I can keep going on and on. Your latest book, Beating Guns, right?
Yeah, and we've been beating guns into plows. One of them for the folks that might watch is, we've been inspired by Micah and Isaiah when they talk about beating swords into plows and spears into pruning hooks. So we've been taking donated guns and turning them into garden tools and other beautiful things, out of those guns. So my friends at Raw Tools, that's their name, which is war flipped backwards, rawtools.org. We wrote the book together. It's got images of all the stuff we're making out of guns. But, I think it's powerful. In the matter of an hour, we can go from a gun to a garden tool. But it's also symbolic that, we believe in concrete change, and we want to see our streets also turned from death to life.
Is that concrete symbolism? Beating guns and the gardening tools, has that been an effective, at least conversation starter, if not?
Dude, it's unbelievable. Really? When we started this stuff, it definitely started as more of a symbolic, provocative, imaginative thing. But we found it's so much deeper than that. We're giving space for healing and for the Holy Spirit to move. To honor people's grief and pain. So we always invite people that are directly impacted by gun violence to take the hammer if they want to, And I mean, we've had moms just beat on the gun barrel, like weeping and naming the names of their children. Uh, my friend Sharon Risher, whose mom was killed in Mother Emanuel AME Church in the South Carolina church as they worshiped, she named all 9 of the Emanuel 9 killed in that shooting. But then we had, other things. We had a man that counted 18 times every time he hit it. 1, 2, 3. And afterwards, was like, man, there's something to that. And he said, yeah, I took the life of an 18-year-old.
Oh God.
And so as I was beating on that, I was praying for healing, So, I mean, it is symbolic, but it's much more than that. I've come to think of it really as sacramental. This religious, there's something holy that happens at the forge as we see the metal transform, but also space for people's grief and trauma
That's
to be
Raw
kind of
Tools.
honored.
They're in Colorado, right? Colorado?
Yeah, they're hubbed out of Colorado. We've got a little Raw Tools shop though now here in Philly. I've got a little blacksmithing shop, and I've got more guns than you do, my man. Mine are just chopped in half, but I've got like probably 40 guns in my basement all chopped into pieces. But yeah, we're
Start a
we're
militia
doing.
if you want to do, Shane. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. People could find you. I mean, shoot, just Google Shane Claiborne. You got a website with a bunch of stuff on there. Some really interesting T-shirts, man. I was checking out the merch at The Simple Way, man. It's some pretty provocative stuff there.
Yeah, man. We got one shirt. What if Jesus meant the stuff he said? And it's got the whole Sermon on the Mount on the back, and yeah. But we created a lot of these micro businesses too to try to support our work in the neighborhood, so folks can find all of my books and other great stuff there too, and the shirts and everything. It's thesimpleway.org.
I just heard a story about you, and I want to confirm it. A buddy of mine, I can't remember who it was now. Shoot.
Oh, fact check, fake news.
No. So somebody said that they were at a conference where you spoke. This might have been years ago. I don't know. And you said, "I'm going to preach the greatest sermon you're ever going to hear," and then you spoke the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, that's a true story.
People booed you or something? Like they didn't like people were upset, or
I don't know about that. I don't think it sold too many copies of the session in the bookstore, but yeah, it was one of those times, you have those times where you just feel like a nudge from the Spirit, and I bounced it off a few people, and I'm like, that's what I'm doing. And it was a conference that I love, but it's also a conference that can sometimes be a little like over the top, over programmed, like bam, 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 and all this noise. And I thought, I think Sermon on the Mounts just speaks for itself. And so, I felt moved to do that. And then I did tell them, if you feel like you need to keep your, honorarium, you just essentially you gave me a lot of money to read the Sermon on the Mount. So like, you can keep all that if you want. No, but it was powerful, man. And people still tell me this day, like, kind of how it cut through the clutter to sort of, speak for itself. But I don't think that was really my original idea. I just felt like in that situation that was the right thing to do. So, yeah, man.
All right, I'll let you go, man. Thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it, dude. Good luck on your life.
Totally, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you need to get rid of any of those guns, just let me know. No, I'm just kidding, bro. It's always good to talk, man. Love you, bro. Yeah.
You too, man. Take care.